My name is Maegen Wells. I'm from Forestville, California, and I build archtop guitars and mandolins. My earliest memories of music are sitting on my mom's lap at a Paul McCartney concert. Music was always in my house. My dad is a drummer. Drumming was always coming through the vents of the house in my room, and I fell in love with music at a very, very early age. I got my first guitar when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I was madly in love with it, even though I didn't know how to play anything. And it was when I was 9 years old that my family moved to England for a few years. My dad was relocated for work. At that age, I really missed my friends and I had a hard time fitting in. And so that was when the guitar became my best friend. I've never really been super great with my words, but I could write a song and play it and you'll know everything you need to know. You know, the guitar was like my antenna. It was how I moved through the world. A teacher of mine in high school, I had a class where all you did was read, and she would play Kottke. And I remember this moment of just kind of putting my book down and looking up and looking around the classroom, and it was like, does anybody else hear this? And the name of that album was One Guitar, No Vocals. And I remember going up to my teacher afterward and being like, who was that? And she said, One Guitar, No Vocals. And I was like, what? You know, you don't even need to sing to tell a story. And that was also really when I started writing my own music. I spent all of my time at the local music store after that. Eventually, I started working there. When I was about 16, I started working just selling strings and stuff like that behind the desk, and they let me work in the acoustic room. The moment I realized that I was destined to build instruments, I was 17 years old, and I had just graduated from high school, and I was sitting on my bed with my guitar, and I was looking at the back of the headstock, and I saw on every tuner it said Taylor, you know, and I was just staring at that, and I was like, that has to be the best feeling in the whole world, for Bob Taylor to look at the back of that headstock. And then I thought, who's Bob Taylor? Wait, what? And I just had known his name from consuming all of these guitar magazines and, but it still had never registered that that was a person doing this. That was when I knew my purpose in this world. It was not a choice. The next day I went back to that music store and I was like, guys, I gotta do this thing, I gotta make guitars. And they're like, oh, you wanna be a luthier? And I was like, yeah, whatever, and they're like, we keep one of those in the basement. And there was this guy down in the basement named Scott Robertson who had been fixing all of the guitars, and he was the one who really, in so many ways, helped me get started and told me about Brian Gallup's School of Lutherie. And I went and immediately signed up for the program, and that was where I first made a guitar. I made an electric guitar, a flat top guitar, a classical guitar, and an archtop guitar. That was their 6-month master's program. Brian's shop is it's like a dreamland. It's 24/7 building guitars, and you're surrounded by other people who are on the same mission. And in the beginning, we're all, super excited and hungry, and then along the way, failures start happening, and we get to be there for each other for that. learning how to love my failures. I learned how to do that at Brian's. I went there with the intention of being a flat top builder because that's what I had always played. At Brian's school, I fell in love with building the archtop guitar because it was just this level of woodworking that I didn't really experience within the other instruments. I mean, there's carving the top and the back, you know, all of the hardware, the tail pieces, the pick guards. It was just so intricate, and the woodworker in me was just ignited. Ever since I was a little girl, I have loved working with hand tools. I loved mowing the lawn. You know, like I remember falling in love with the lawnmower as like a 6-year-old. And then I remember my mom was clearing tile off the walls in our kitchen, and she was using a chisel and a hammer. And again, I was probably 6 or 7 at this point, and she just gave me a chisel and hammer. I just cleared everything, and it was just like, wow. When I got into high school, I started taking welding classes. I took woodworking classes. And it was when I took woodworking that I just was like, I mean, I completely fell in love. Like I can remember just that level of excitement. The only thing that had ever made me that excited was playing the guitar. And so at Brian's school, I fell in love with the archtop, building it. And then once I had the completed instrument, it was the first time anybody had ever put an archtop in my hands. And I fell in love. I actually took that guitar back to Scott's shop, and I was sitting in the basement and everybody was gone. And that was the first time I ever wrote an instrumental piece. And it was because I didn't want to sing anymore. Like all I ever wanted was to hear every note this guitar could sing, you know. It wasn't about me, it was about the guitar. And now I just got to have this full submersion. The sun would come up and go down, and I wouldn't have eaten much that day, but it went by in a blink of an eye, all inside of Brian's shop. And it was like, oh, that's what I want the rest of my life to feel like. And then one day you can't come back. You know, you can't come back. And that was another amazing thing about Brian's, is like, okay, now you have to leave and you have to figure this out on your own. You know, and that was hard and scary, especially being so young and not having any money. And I remember the first time I ever looked up to say, oh, well, I wonder how much a clamp cost, or a bandsaw. And I mean, I remember just sitting out on a bench one day just being like, I'm never gonna be able to do this. How am I gonna, sure I can build a guitar, but I can't afford all of those machines. But I have my guitar, just like always, just me and the guitar, follow the guitar, continue to trust my gut, my intuition, work hard and trust the guitar. All the while that archtop I was still madly in love with that archtop. And during that time I was looking into the history of archtop guitars. And I fell in love with the beautiful story that is there, full of apprentices and mentors and pain, and I was like, that is what I'm looking for. Like I'm looking for the mentor that I will give everything to, and in return he'll give everything to me. You know, it's not a take, it's a give, you know. It was around that time that I went to a guitar show in Miami and I met Tom Rebecki. And I had heard his name, I'd read about him in books, but when we met, it was magic. And I spent the rest of the weekend just kind of running around with him, and I just have memories of that weekend laughing so hard.
Excuse me, I have to grab that guitar.
Common Slate acoustic tape.
Oh, wait, I need to record.
Motherfucker.
Jesus. All right, that's why we need a union. Slate, please.
Common Slate, acoustic take 1.
And he said, well, I don't know what this next year holds, but I would love to get you out here. And so I spent that next year saving up my money to buy a car that would make it out to California. And in 2009, I moved here to be his apprentice. So I was there for 6 years, and that was absolute bliss. It was everything that I wanted, everything I was looking for. It was that true, beautiful mentor-apprentice relationship. There isn't anything I do where I don't have his voice in my head or a memory. Tom turned me into an archtop builder, and he taught me, if there's anything, I guess the biggest lesson from him is how to survive. How do you survive building instruments? Actually, making the guitars is kind of the easy part. It's all of the other things that go along with it that can be very, very difficult. So Tom taught me how to survive as an instrument maker. A Maegen Wells guitar, first and foremost, begins with a love of wood. Everything I do is inspired by my materials. I'm very much an intuitional builder. In my process, it's a bit old school. What it comes down to is my relationship with my materials and my tools. My tools are like the conduit. A lot of times people will ask me, well, you know, how did you do that? Or what's going on here? That, and I'm like, I just did what the wood told me to do. Focusing on gathering all of my materials has been a whole chapter of my story, just like learning the craft was a chapter of my story. And once I built my shop, I said, okay, now I'm gonna buy the wood. And connecting with these people who I call my wood heroes. They're the ones out there, you know, putting their hands on a tree. I've got people who are like, this is gonna be for Maegen. You know, they're thinking of me at the source. Any piece of wood that ends up on my bench, it's like a miracle that it even got there. I mean, to process a tree, there's so many fallen soldiers along the way. And I worked at LMI for 5 years in their wood shop, and that's where I really learned, like, oh my gosh, like it's a miracle any of this stuff ever ends up on anybody's bench. It also became obvious to me early on that the quality of materials is only going down and they're getting more expensive. So I became infatuated with purchasing my lifetime supply of materials. And while I was working at LMI, I bought my lifetime supply of ebony. I bought my lifetime supply of mahogany, and I try to buy material for 500 instruments. That's my number. Because I hope to make 400 in my life, I figure an extra 100 for whatever is probably good to have. And not only do I have the comfort of being able to cuddle up with my ebony at the end of the night and knowing that I'm never gonna be without it, but I have a consistency that I can continue to deliver. All of my necks are from the same tree. I get to grow old with this wood. You know, I live with this wood. I drink coffee with this wood. I have cocktails with this wood, you know? I can't do any of it without my wood. When I grab a piece of wood, I can see a guitar. And so as I'm building it, I have this vision that in my head, very much inspired by the materials, but of what the color is going to be. The guitar tells me what it wants. Finish work, that is a whole world in itself. And that was a world that I lived in for a few years when I was working at Tom's. And it's one of the things that drew me to his instruments in the first place was his beautiful color work. And thankfully, while I was at Tom's, I spent a lot of time sanding lacquer. And he always told me, this is the difference between a $5,000 instrument and a $20,000 instrument, is a good quality finish. No matter how many times it takes, I cannot settle. It has to match that vision. So when I do my color work, I kind of turn into a crazy person because I am just chasing this vision. This is the time where that guitar kind of matures from my woodworking project into the instrument that I've been dreaming of. And if I don't get it just right, I will strip that finish. And within my builder friends, like, I'm totally known for just stripping a finish over and over and over again. I do not care how many times it will take, because it has to be perfect. I mean, making a great sounding and playing instrument is obviously the most important thing, but like, the person has to want to pick it up in the first place, you know? They've kind of got to fall in love with it from across the room. And so much of that is the color that draws them in. When I made the blue guitar and the blue mandolin, that was a very unique experience because unlike most of the other instruments I've made, I could not see the color in my head for the pair. The blue guitar collection was something that I heard about while I was at Brian's school, right when I started to fall in love with archtops. And it's this collection of instruments that was commissioned in the 90s by a collector to pay homage to Jimmy D. Kiso. Jimmy had built the blue Centura, and that was his blue archtop. And so the collector, Scott Chinnery, commissioned the world's best archtop builders at the time to build a guitar inspired by Jimmy, but very much in the vein of their own thing, what they're doing. It just had to be blue. They were like unicorns to me. It was this magical, beautiful thing that happened, but I never thought I would ever get to be in the presence of them. And that was a really big deal to work for Tom, because Tom was in the blue guitar collection. Not only are these people recognized as the best, but it's about saluting those who came before us. You know, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for Jimmy, if it weren't for John D'Angelico, if it weren't for Orville Gibson. We wouldn't be here. One day I got a phone call from a client who I had already taken order from. He was on my wait list, and he was like, hey, I bought the blue guitar collection. And I was hoping that the guitar I have on order with you can be for the collection. I was stunned. I was like, no, you can't, this isn't a good idea. I don't deserve it. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Once it started happening, once it came time to build the blue guitar, and the mandolin kind of emerged from that as well, I locked myself in the shop for months. It was about 4 months of me right here every day. And there were times when the sun went up and went down, you know, back to being at Brian's, and it was like, oh, I want my life to be like that. That happened. And it wasn't because I was on a deadline at all. It was just because I couldn't stop. And all along throughout the build process, you know, I obviously knew it needed to be blue, but what kind of blue? I couldn't see it. And that scared me, because it was the most important instruments of my whole life. And it's the morning of color day, and I still couldn't see it. And I had to walk into that spray booth without that vision. Tom had given me some of his original blue dye. So I had drops of the original dye in my special little formula that I just made like a crazy person, you know? Just like, oh, this, little that, and that, and then this magical dye from Tom that, I mean, I never even thought I would ever get to see the blue guitar collection. And here I am making instruments that are going to be inducted to the collection with the original blue dye, and I don't even know what I'm doing, and I can't even, but again, I put on the same album I always put on, which is Dark Side of the Moon, whenever I do a color job, and I went in there, and it just happened. And to be inducted into that collection, it was like, well, I'm not worthy. And I might always feel that way, but I know those materials were worthy. And I know that those instruments are worthy too because of it. There are really only a small amount of things that go into my guitars that I do not make myself. And as far as all of like the fundamental elements that make up my guitar and the things that are going to affect the voice of the instrument, the only thing I don't make myself are the strings. I have to know it in my soul that my string of choice is going to join me in my mission as a partner to help that instrument reach its maximum potential. And my most trusted partner when it comes to strings is D'Addario. It always has been. I have a variety of needs. One of my goals with the instruments I make is to build a versatile instrument. So depending on what the guitar wants, or depending on what the player wants, I might need phosphor bronze, I might need nickel bronze, I might need half gauges. Knowing that I can get whatever that guitar is demanding of me from one umbrella, no matter what it is, like, I know D'Addario's gonna have my back. D'Addario has always been there for me, like ever since I was a little girl. I mean, saving up my money from mowing the lawns to go buy a fresh pack of D'Addarios. It was just like, that's where the inspiration begins, is that holding that fresh set of strings in your hand, and you're gonna go home and you're gonna go put them on your guitar, and it's like you like get to fall in love all over again with this thing that you are already so madly in love with. And those are some of the best memories of my life, or feeling that way with my musical companion. And that's all I want to do as a guitar maker, is to create something that's gonna make people feel that way. And I know that D'Addario is also my partner in that mission. Like, we just wanna inspire people to play music. That's what it's all about.